Hi everyone, welcome to episode 3 of the Anthony's Antics podcast. This episode, I want to try and address a topic that is pretty complex. I'm going to take a punt at it anyway. I alluded to it last episode, and it's the topic of the rebel angels. Listeners of this podcast will know that I have a lot of beliefs about spiritual matters. I've always believed there is a God. I've always believed in Jesus. And I've always believed in angels as well, I suppose. First hearing about them, of course, from the Bible. Unlike some people, I can't claim to have seen an angel, although I've seen plenty of what's called angel sparkles. Just little pinpricks of light, very intense pinpricks of light at times, just appearing in the space next to me. This is a phenomenon well known to people, I guess, in the New Age community and perhaps beyond. These angel sparkles seem to signify the presence of, I guess, an angel nearby, perhaps your own guardian angel. So angels are well known across all the religions, certainly in the religions of the book, those being, of course, Christianity, Judaism and Islam. All the holy texts of those religions speak of angels. If you speak to any modern proponent, particularly of Islam, they will tell you that they definitely believe that angels exist and that angels can do the will of God in earthly affairs. I think as will a lot of Christians, but it depends on people's level of belief. The situation is a little more ambiguous with, I think, modern Jewish people. However, it's from their sacred texts that we get our knowledge of angels in the first place. So, once again, the Jews have given us Christ, and they also gave us our first knowledge of angels, and we use the angel names such as Michael, Gabriel, and others that the Jewish people originated. So we have them to thank for so much esoteric knowledge in the West. And those same religions and the ones before, such as the Persian religion of Zoroastrianism, will also speak of evil angels or rebel angels or fallen angels is another common terminology. And this is a huge topic, and it won't be easy to do justice to, but I will be coming at this topic from the perspective of the writings of the Urantia Book, as I've mentioned in a previous podcast, and also the writings of Timothy Wyllie, a British mystic and former member of the Process Church. I have to say, coming across the Urantia Book and Timothy Wyllie's books, as I've mentioned before, have really changed my life, as sometimes books will do. Really alters the way you think about things, changes your life, I suppose, is the cliche. But again, I want to reiterate, I'm not one of these people who will just grab onto a new idea and just run with it heedlessly, down the garden path. What I've learned, and as author Jonathan Black says, anyone who has an interest in the spiritual and the esoteric, after a while you get a nose for this sort of thing, without sounding too arrogant about it. You do develop a nose for it. You develop a sense for where the consistencies lie in the different accounts that you read. And so any new information is, I certainly treat any new information with an initial amount of skepticism and caution. As I've mentioned, in the case of the books of Timothy Wyllie, it took me quite a while to warm to his ideas. Well, technically, they're not even his ideas. He channels his books. Well, the latest series of books, Confessions of a Rebel Angel, are channeled by Georgia, the former rebel angel. And Timothy Wyllie has said that he's not even conscious of what he's writing, even though he has a shared consciousness with Georgia as he's writing. He often is not even fully aware of what he's written until the finished product is complete. There is so much to his work that it's impossible almost to remember it all and to process it all. It's so dense. Because what we're getting is the channeling of an angel who says that she was present in the affairs of this earth 500,000 years ago, so 500,000 years ago, starting with this off-world mission to the earth, and having that 500,000 year lifespan. George's memories are sort of ever present to her, and so she is almost trying to download 500,000 years of angel life experience via these. So far, there have been 5 books. So, in that respect, it's such a dense download that there is so much to wade through. And it seems that with the affairs of the rebel angels, with the affairs of the mission to Earth, and the multiverse administration, which is the governing body in our universe that supervises all angelic activity and supervises all the sentient races across the different globes of the universe. There is just so much going on, and occasionally there is definitely a sense that there are things left unsaid. It's almost like with any bureaucracy, because we're talking about an angelic bureaucracy here, one that exists in different dimensions to ours. Even in the angelic bureaucracy, there is politics. There is agendas behind everything that happens, and the mistake the rebel angels made was in assuming that multiverse authority was out of line or was a fraud in some way, that the orders coming down to them were incorrect and that they could not carry out their mission based on these flawed orders coming from multiverse authority, or MA as they abbreviate it quite facetiously. But I suppose that's just it. These rebel angels, which were led by Lucifer, Satan, and our planetary prince, Caligastia, in a sense, you get the feeling that they almost didn't know. They almost didn't know that they were about to go catastrophically wrong. They were actually trying to fulfill their mission, which, as I mentioned before, 500,000 years ago, when certain beings incarnated upon this earth with the plan of uplifting the consciousness of the earth natives, together with their cadre of midway angels and other angels, under the authority of Prince Caligastia, who the Gnostics call the prince of this world and who Jesus refers to in the Gospels. When this mission arrived, their mission was in alignment with the purposes laid down by multiverse authority. They were here to introduce technology such as metallurgy and other advanced sciences to the Earth natives, and there was a whole range of other portfolios as well, just like in a modern government ministry. So there was portfolios for medicine, for animal husbandry, all these different projects initiated by the first off-world mission to Earth, and the angels, together with the incarnated beings who were working directly with native human beings, trying to teach them, get them to learn. The progress was frustratingly slow. I mean, that's the key takeaway that one gets when one reads the Timothy Wyllie books in particular. George's narration shows that the missionaries, if we can call them that, were experiencing such slow progress that after, I think it was 209,000 years, something like that, almost 300,000 years approximately, the mission was finding the work of uplifting the Earth natives frustratingly slow. The missionaries would work with selected human natives from the neighbouring tribes. The missionaries were working out of their headquarters somewhere in the Arabian area, I think a peninsula somewhere around that region. It was a coastal region, I remember that much. But somewhere in the Arabian area, that's where this off-world mission was actually headquartered, and they would draw people from the surrounding tribal settlements and try and get them to learn new skills, and then send those people back to their settlements. And then either the people would show total disinterest in this new technology, or at worst, these practitioners of the new sciences would be branded sorcerers or sorceresses, and they'd be put to death. And so the tragic cycle of human existence goes on. And so that's what the angels, together with the incarnated beings they were serving, had to face. And what happened was, coinciding, I find this very interesting, because coinciding with the difficulties that the off-world mission was facing approximately 300,000 years ago, coinciding with this difficulty experienced by this mission on Earth, Lucifer, who was the system sovereign at that time, so Lucifer was in administrative charge of 1,000 planets, including Earth, of course. Some of those planets were uninhabited, but most of them were inhabited, so Lucifer had charge of many mortal beings under his overall care, together with his assistant, who is Satan. Now, as I said, at the same time the mission was floundering on Earth, Lucifer was also coming up with his own manifesto, which, as most people who are familiar with Lucifer will know, was that, in effect, that he was wiser, I guess, than God. He knew better. He even accused the multiverse authorities of concocting this fiction of the invisible God who dwelled in the central universe that no one could ever see. Unfortunately, angels not possessing the divine spark could not travel to meet with God, which is, the Urantia Book says, is our ultimate destiny as mortal beings. We carry the indwelling spark of the Father God, and when we've finished our career on the inner dimensions of the universe, we will travel to the central universe to meet God, and there to decide, where we will go from there, I suppose. And so Lucifer, not carrying the indwelling spark of God, not having the divine spark within him, as no angel does, they are simply direct creations of God. Lucifer decided that the existence of this God was a fraud. And from what I understand, all angels are created by the Divine Mother, so perhaps this is an example of, a wayward son favouring his mother over his father and rebelling against his father. It's just quite fascinating. Rereading some of Jesus' parables in the Gospels, I almost wouldn't be surprised if Jesus' parable of the prodigal son and other parables of a similar nature, I would be surprised if they weren't about Lucifer. I really think some of these parables strike me very much as being possibly referring to Lucifer. You can see those parables in a new light when you think about it in that way. So at the same time the mission was struggling on Earth, Lucifer formulated his manifesto of liberty for all beings, freedom for the angels, freedom to decide how best to accelerate the development of all mortals under their care on all planets, not just Earth, but all the ones under their administrative charge. And another very interesting thing is that according to the Urantia Book, I believe only 37 of Lucifer's 600 or so inhabited planets, a further 400 or so were uninhabited. But out of the 600 or so inhabited planets, only 37 align themselves with Lucifer. And what that means is each planet having a planetary prince in charge of that particular planet, only 37 planetary princes out of about 600 sided with Lucifer. However, our Earth, of course, as fate would have it, was one of them. Prince Caligastia being all too willing to break with multiverse authorities due to the frustration felt by his missionaries and himself in trying to effect any change on this stubborn globe of ours. And so the fateful decision was made to break with multiverse authority. And the interesting consequence of that, and here we have the root cause of all our problems today, all of our difficulties, and indeed the root cause of atheism in our contemporary world. Our planet was quarantined from the rest of the universe, which means we were cut off from the incoming spiritual vibrations that link us to the rest of the universe, the spiritual circuitry as it's known. And so this terrible sense of isolation and alienation and claustrophobia pretty much must have immediately taken hold deep in the subconscious of the Earth natives. They wouldn't have had the words to express it perhaps, but they probably intuited something terrible had happened. So in response to Lucifer's rebellion, all the planets that had gone over with him into rebellion were spiritually sectioned off from the rest of the universe, cut off and quarantined. And I think you'll find this is where the Ouroboros symbol comes from, the circular, the snake in a circle eating its own tail. It's a symbol of isolation and insanity, really. It's a closed system. It's like the Apophis Egyptian serpent god just screaming through the night, blind, unable to see. Why? Because it's been left in the dark, cut off from the higher spiritual influences coming from the center universe and coming from the level of the Creator, Son, and Divine Mother of our universe. So literally we were like cast out. So it wasn't just the angels who were cast out of heaven, we all were. Any tenuous connection to God and to divine influences, to higher influence, was cut off in what seems like a strange action, to be honest. One can't help but question the actions of the multiverse authorities in this regard. to take the radical step of cutting off whole planets of mortals from the incoming influence of God. It just, I guess in my weak intellect, it just seems like a strange decision and one with deeply tragic consequences for this world. I guess the positive thing to come out of it is that the multiversal authorities have since declared in our modern times that more good has now come out of the Lucifer rebellion than bad, and apparently the rebellion has finally been adjudicated, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the initial rebellion. So the Urantia Book and Timothy Wyllie's books tell us that the rebel angels were now free to follow their own path, and what happened was the rebel angels, at the behest of their prince, who was becoming more and more unhinged, more and more ruthless in his dealings with the incarnated mortal beings on Earth, they became more and more selfish and became more and more emotionally detached from human beings, manipulating us in all sorts of ways, setting us against each other in wars so that we would develop technology that way. And Georgia makes a more serious allegation, and one that historically may be very difficult for many people to believe. However, I tend to believe it, and she claims that Caligastia revealed the secrets of the atom bomb to the inhabitants of this earth 200,000 years ago, and that is why much of the Middle East is desert. It probably shouldn't be desert. It probably should still be, at the very least, savanna or perhaps even forest in some manner. I'm not a geography expert, but much of the Middle East is blasted sand because a terrible war broke out because Caligastia, via his Midway angels, was busy stirring up the natives against one another, using the priesthood to fuel superstitions, to fuel racial tensions. And we see this pattern right down to today. That's why the claims of Georgia in this respect are not difficult to believe. They're exactly analogous to what we see today. It's all too easy to drum up racial tension. You pick a racial group, such as the Islamic races, for example, the different races that subscribe to the Islamic religion. You demonize them to a certain group of people. So Caucasian people, Western people, you put about the notion that Muslims are backward, evil, barbarians, and it's so much easier to drum up support for your war against them, and vice versa. People on the Islamic side demonize people in the West. They drum up hatred against the West, tell their followers to kill them with whatever you can get your hands on, your car, whatever you can do to kill the evil Westerners, the infidels, and there you have it. So a tragic pattern initiated 200,000 years ago thanks to an insane angelic prince continues to reverberate with tragic, gut-wrenching consequences even to this day. So the rebel angels and Prince Caligastia have a very heavy karmic burden as a result of this, and as I alluded to before, I actually consider myself one of the angels who aligned with Prince Caligastia and Lucifer at the time of the rebellion. Having read Timothy Wyllie's books and thought long and hard about this, contemplated it in depth, I see the own pattern play out in my own life, in my own psyche. I've mentioned how I have anger problems. I've mentioned how I've struggled a lot in this life. Rebel angels tend to really struggle with a lot of difficulties in life. And I guess to clarify, Georgia does say that there are up to 100 million incarnated rebel angels at this time. We've returned to try and help at this key time of Earth's history, and I do have a message of hope coming, so stay tuned. There is hope at the end of this podcast. But I suppose as a rebel angel, as a former rebel angel now incarnated as a mortal being, I now have the divine indwelling spark of God. Deep in my heart, I definitely want to keep improving. I definitely want to keep becoming more human. That's very much the sense that I get of myself in my life, that the way forward, the way for healing, I need to find that spark of God within me, because God, if we can become as close to God as we can, I believe we actually become more human, more loving, more compassionate, and more intelligent. God is all things. God created everything. Therefore, the closer we get to God, the more wisdom we can obtain as well, and more intelligence. Going to church as a young child, my sole wish was to be a channel for God's peace. And to expand on that a little bit more, what I have found throughout my life I have found it very difficult to even be peaceful within myself. Now what I practice is acceptance, and I have to say, practicing acceptance is such a peace-inducing thing. I had an experience the other day where I was struggling inside. I was barely even consciously aware of it, but there was a struggle going on deep in my subconscious. You know, wanting to own my own home. I don't own my own home as yet, and you know, I want to have a better job and, you know, have more money, etc., etc. And it's like I had this internal struggle going on, hardly aware of it really. But then I received a piece of intuitive guidance, you know, and these things always come to us from our guardian angels. You know, whenever we get a piece of good advice pop into our consciousness, it's because our angels are there trying to encourage us and trying to feed us, you know, little bits of wisdom here and there. And the piece of advice I received is to, hey, look, just release the struggle. Just be accepting in the moment, you know, like it doesn't mean give up. It just means move into a mode of acceptance, which is also a type of gratitude, I think, as well. And I was able to do that. I was able to switch into a mode of acceptance, and boy, oh boy, I felt so much better inside. I felt so peaceful, and I actually felt like all was right with the world. It was an amazing thing. And this guidance actually came to me in the form of a dream. I won't go into that in detail, but it was a dream basically of being confused about where I was working and thinking that I was going to the wrong workplace. It's a whole thing. But I woke up thinking, oh, where do I work? Oh, thank God I work at a place that pays me regularly and that I have regular work and and all this. It's as if the dream, by bringing out some fears inside, the contrast with my actual reality, which is, you know, it may not be the greatest thing on earth, but it's nice and stable. It is currently a reliable source of income, and I pay my bills and I look after my family and etc. And I suppose the angels via the dream were encouraging me to have this realization, to accept my reality, that in the moment everything is good. It's like, you know, everything's good. And that helped me a lot. So that was a good piece of angelic medicine there for my troubled soul. So getting back to the whole rebel angel thing. So Georgia claims that contemporary souls such as Timothy Wyllie, the LSD exponent in America, was an incarnated rebel angel, and he had to pay a heavy price for his proselytizing. Rebel angel types. How do you know if you're a rebel angel? Well, if you're a former rebel angel now incarnated as a mortal human being, I use the term mortal in the same sense that Georgia and the Urantia Book uses it, which is any incarnated being on any planet in the universe. So you don't have to be human. You could be a mortal on another planet and be a dragon, or a seagoing squid, or you know, being mortal just means that you are a fully sentient, dominant species on whatever planet you might be found. So human beings are mortals, but not all mortals are human. So as an incarnated mortal now with a rebel angel past, I've been working through my heavy karmic burden, and you know, and that's life. Life is work. You know, there's no way to be here and not work. I don't think. I think life is activity, life is flux, life is motion, and if you're not working towards being a better person, then you know, you might be backsliding. So from the time of the angelic rebellion, approximately 200,000 years ago, after 300,000 years of the mission, Prince Caligastia, the prince of this world, the being in charge of the angels who dwell in the earth region, became more and more cruel, more and more like a despot, cruel tyrant. It's important to note that Caligastia was not incarnated on this planet. He remained in the angelic dimensions, where he could be accessed by his midway angels and other types of angels. But he became more and more convinced that that Earth people were basically a little better than vermin, and he had the right to treat them in any way he saw fit. And we see that in the powers that be today. They seem to have very little care for, you know, the flesh and blood, spirit indwelt beings that walk upon this earth and seek to be safe and treated fairly and justly, and just want to have their families protected. The powers that be on this earth seem to care very little for that. which is a great continuing tragedy. And it mirrors exactly Prince Caligastia's attitude towards human beings. He cared not one jot when the atomic war broke out, approximately 200,000 years ago. And here we stand again. Now we possess nuclear weapons once again. We've rediscovered the technology, is how I now think of it. And we're faced with the same choice. Do we just keep perpetuating the same tragic cycles? Or do we try to rise above this? And this is the thing. I don't think science, I don't think atheism, I don't think humanism, or any other of these non-spiritual philosophies have the answer for human beings, for the human race, and for the protection of the environment. These philosophies are flawed because they do not take account of the spiritual dimension of human life and of the cosmos. They don't take account of the fact that we are joined as one, and these connections are spiritual in nature. They are not external. They are not on the basis that we all belong to a human society. We have connections that run far deeper than these external things. We are all born from God, and our planet Earth is a sacred creation. We have no right to think we can do whatever we want with it, pour whatever we want into its rivers, dump whatever we want into its oceans. And all these things are from science. See, this is the way that I see it as someone who does not have a scientific axe to grind, as someone who's not a disciple of science. To me, I just see the things that science has done wrong. Science has got so many things wrong. It's amazing that people are so brainwashed today to think that science is getting everything right. It's just not true. Science is denying a core aspect of human existence, which is our spirit. And if you deny the spirit, you choke the life out of the whole human race. Eventually you will end in disaster, because without the spirit there is no life. Spirit is what animates our bodies. We are not just random creations of the cosmos. We are here, we are meant, we have purpose. We are here to grow, develop, and deepen in wisdom and deepen in compassion for one another. And science knows nothing of this. No compassion can ever come out of science or humanism or the atheistic philosophies, and I think that's demonstrable. Christ said, "By their fruit shall you know them." And let's look at the track record of science for a moment. A science cut off from the spirit. We have things like Agent Orange, thalidomide. We have lead in paint, lead in household paint. Can you believe that? Here we are decorating here we were decorating our most intimate, private living spaces with a deadly poison. Pharmaceuticals, another example. So the chemical revolution of the late 1800s has flooded our world with toxic chemicals, flooded our bloodstreams. And yet we call this medicine somehow. In the West, we are so brainwashed to just believe that pharmaceuticals are the answer to everything. Chemicals are the answer to the production of food. It's insanity. This is a level of insanity that has become so normal that we don't even realize that we are being hoodwinked. One thing that I've awakened to, and that many conspiracy theorists will already know, is we are so brainwashed in the West. We think we are free. We think we have choice, and we think we are democratic. No, we are not democratic. The people do not rule in the West. Democracy means rule of the people. If the people would step up and wake up from their brainwashing, yes, we might stand a chance of having more democracy, but it relies on people waking up and seeing that the level of brainwashing is so intense. Donald Trump is not the first person to posit the idea that news is fake. I've known news is pretty damn fake all my whole life, ever since I had a school project where I had to sit down and watch several different news bulletins, note the stories that they were broadcasting, note the differences between the news stories, and write a summary at the end. And I tell you what, I was shocked, even as a young kid, how different a broadcast about the same news topic across different networks would have such radical differences. So they would get major details wrong, like how many people were involved or how many people were killed, what happened. The very same incident, which you think would be straightforward reporting, was so different from network to network. So based on that simple thing, how can we put any faith in the media if they can get such little things wrong? Doctors. I grew up with the feeling that doctors hardly a clue what they were doing. My father was not diagnosed for kidney stones. Just a simple thing like kidney stones for years and years, like at least 5 to 10 years. His GP could not tell him what was wrong with him, and he was suffering intolerable pain on a daily basis. So this is what I'm saying. How can we believe and put faith in our modern establishment of doctors and media and politicians when these individuals have proved themselves to be tragically wrong time and time again? I just don't understand how people can be so blind. But of course it all comes back to money, and it comes back to people's corrupt conduct. People just want power at the expense of truth, and that's exactly what Jesus Christ had to face when he walked upon this earth and came across the corrupt powers of his time that would rather scream through the night blind and heedless than lift up their heads for a moment and pay attention to the truth. But let me get to the good news. So we've talked about rebel angels. I've digressed into what I see as the corruption of our modern time. But I've been receiving another intuitive message, and it's a good one. So back to the topic of rebel angels. So I've alluded to the fact that the karmic patterns set in motion all those years ago by the actions of the rebel angels and their leader, Prince Caligastia, who was following the lead, of course, of Lucifer and Satan, denying the authority of the one God, attempting to do things their own way, which, as we've seen, has not resulted in very good results for the earth. How some people can still be on Twitter and say that they love things like black magic and all this, it just boggles the mind. I don't see how there can be any practitioners of black magic who just seem to be otherwise normal people, how they can align themselves with black magic at this crucial time. I just don't get that. But anyway, we all have our path. So yes, the good news is that despite Earth having to endure this universal quarantine, despite the human race having to weather so many tragic phases of brutality and inhumanity, in the early 1980s, according to Timothy Wyllie, something took place, something mysterious took place on the inner planes where the angels dwell. And the terms that Timothy Wyllie uses is adjudication. So somehow high-ranking beings in the multiversal authority adjudicated the Lucifer rebellion. Now what that means hasn't been precisely laid out, but in essence it may have to do with the judgment that I mentioned earlier, that the multiverse authorities have declared that more good has now come from the rebellion than bad. And so perhaps that means the karmic effects are due to be nullified. And it is interesting that not long after this intuitive message was received by Timothy Wyllie and other people in his company, that the Cold War came to an end not long after that. So the pattern laid down by Caligastia, which is where the priests of two different, say, racial groups or nations would manipulate the populations of those different nations and urge them into a crusade against one another. Where have we heard that before? And the two nations would then duke it out, and then the resulting arms race would then, I guess, be assigned to Caligastia and his angels. Look, we've taught the human beings how to use this advanced technology. We're fulfilling our mission. See? This is the way to do it, through cruelty and through harsh treatment. Caligastia is the original archetype of the cruel father, I think. The cruel, domineering and punishing father. And so the adjudication somehow marked an end to a certain phase of the rebellion. It's unclear. I can't get the full meaning of the adjudication from Timothy Wyllie's books. But the intuitive message that I've been receiving recently is that the levels of craziness that we see in the world today, and perhaps my definition of crazy is different to other people's. You can probably deduce something of my opinions from this podcast. So the intuitive message that I've been getting lately is that sanity is due to break through again. And I've really been praying for that. I've really been praying that some kind of true sanity comes back to this planet if it was ever here. Because yes, that's the result of the adjudication, I've just remembered, is that we are being let back into the universal life stream. So our isolation is over. As that young man screams at the end of the Matrix Revolutions, the war is over. The rebellion is essentially over. Rebel angels of all stripes are actually coming back now with a new mission to assist in truly uplifting this planet into the beautiful jewel that she is meant to be, and the human race into the civilization of gentle, wise, and enlightened people that we are meant to be. I have no idea how that's going to happen. What I find with angelic guidance is you very rarely get the how. In fact, there is so much New Age literature out there which basically says, don't worry about the how, just focus on the what. So what is it that you want? Set your intentions for the what, and let God take care of the how. And there's probably a heck of a lot of wisdom in that, because God could probably organize things much better with his divine level of intelligence than our small human brains could. So that's a brief thumbnail sketch of how I see the whole rebel angel phenomenon. It's almost as if there is a benign angelic conspiracy happening in the background to bring back the light, to bring something new to this earth, a new level of sanity that we've perhaps never known. Maybe we've had glimpses of it during benign reigns of certain monarchs. So there have been glimpses of sanity and of a sense of spiritual reason. So that's the note I'm going to end on. There's something good coming. Will it coincide with what seems to be a landmark year, at least as far as the numbers on the calendar go, 2020? I feel like 2012 was a key year when people had to lock in their choices. That, to me, was the true meaning of 2012. People had to really decide if they were going to be on the side of humanity, on the side of truth, on the side of integrity. Truth regardless of consequences, not just conforming to the establishment dictates for the sake of belonging, for the sake of, conformity, which I absolutely despise, I have to say. And were they going to do that, or were they going to continue selling out humanity for the highest bidder, feathering their own nests, continuing the cycle of negativity in the hope of obtaining some kind of power over their fellow man? So we've moved past 2012 now. It's 2017. It's so weird to say the year 2017. It just feels weird coming out of my mouth, and it's weird to look at the year on the calendar. It seems like the future, Seems like some strange futuristic time, 2017. I do feel 2020 is a landmark year. Astrologically speaking, we are coming up to a very significant conjunction of Saturn and Pluto in Saturn's ruling sign of Capricorn. I believe it's in January 2020 when Saturn and Pluto are exactly conjunct in Capricorn, and that seems like an incredibly powerful astrological alignment. The Sun will also be in Capricorn at that time, and I just think that heralds a major shake-up in world structures, world governments, Capricorn being the sign of temporal authorities and governments, and Saturn, of course, being that father, that cruel father I mentioned. The old devil Saturn, I guess he's often called. So I think Saturn conjunct Pluto. Pluto is the planet of destruction, of breaking apart old forms in the most radical way possible, but to build them back up again. Again, as I mentioned, when I had my brush with Pluto, when I had my worst difficulties in life, it was not to destroy me, it was not to make me go under, it was to make me rise again. And so my hope for this world is that Pluto conjunct Saturn. I truly hope that this Saturn conjunct Pluto will really shake things up. Hopefully not too literally, but it will give the powers that be of this world a major wake-up call, hopefully never to rise again in the same form. As I say, hopefully to rise in a more enlightened form, one that is good for all and not just good for some. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for listening. This has been Anthony's Antics podcast. Hope I've left you with some food for thought, and I'll talk to you again next time. Bye-bye.